9 days a week. He's having pretty hard. But pray for Ray. Pray for each one of them. Well, let's go to the book of James first, and then we'll look at some things in the book of Numbers also. And I just want one verse, the last verse in chapter 4 of the book of James. How many of you, well, I started to say something dumb. I started to say, how many of you have killed someone today? And that's terrible. And honestly, it goes on every day. And all around us, more places. And we know Austin said a long ago when it was in around Chicago. I mean, they'd have drive-by shootings all the time, and really not even reported. Years ago, when my wife was working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, she worked for it, and there was about 7 or 8 of them there, I believe. But one of them was from New York, and his mother lived there. And I think his mother was way up in the years of life, and out of your apartments up there at all. You don't get out of your house. He said if you look out and see someone shoot someone else, you just yank the curtain down or the blind down as fast as you can. And places. But I don't think any of us have done that today, and I pray you haven't. Of course, we could go off there and say, how many of us have said something today with our wording that has broken, that pierced that heart too. But most of you, I found in 17, therefore to him that knoweth to do good, and doeth it not, to him it is sin. Look at it again. Therefore to him that knoweth to do good, and doeth it not, to him it is sin. Now that's another question. To do good to one another. The Bible tells us it's sin to not do good to one another. Didn't that what it said? I think I've read it right there. But to do good. Wouldn't our world be a whole lot better if we seemed that good to one another, husbands and wives and children and so forth, but just to be good to one another. Now, if we're not good, we say, well, we wasn't as bad as, that other person. But yet, that does not take away from iron. It says to not do good, to him it is sin. And he was way before me. Someone said something about 88 years old or something. Was that Ray? There. And then I was thinking of Brother Larry. He don't miss that are getting close to that. But I don't know how I got there. But thank the Lord we got that, right? Amen. Dr. Bob Jones used to say, do right until the stars fall. Do right until the stars fall. And he's right there. there's no reason, a lot of excuses for not doing right, but do right until the stars fall. In the book of Numbers, and we'll look into here, and we'll had just reported to work, and he heard those dreaded words. He said, "Child choking, child choking." He responded immediately. It was early. In fact, he was taking another man's place that day. But he flipped his red lights and the sirens on as the dispatcher gave him directions where to go. He had just started in San Diego, California. But his first call was a life and death emergency, which was several miles away. He decided to take the unfinished highway as it was next to impossible to get through the traffic on Highway 101. But just ahead was the street that would take him to the destination. Between him and that road, as he took that unfinished road, thought there was a place to get off. And there was none. His tires began to squeak as he stopped. His red light still flashing. He got out and he looked at the busy road that was so far below. And Les cried out, "God help me! God help me!" And he looked up and he saw a man. Standing there and said, "Officer, what's the matter?" He looked up and the man had a big, gigantic, earth-moving vehicle. And Les said, "A child is choking to death. A child is choking to death." And he said, "I've got to get down there, but there's no road." He said, "If I go around, it'll take too much time." And that man with the big earth-moving piece of equipment said, "Follow me, I'll make you a road." And he took off, and Les followed him, and made him way down to get back on the road. In just a little while, the officer was at the location he was supposed to be. He burst through the doorway, and a terrified mother handed Les her little baby. The little baby was already blue. The little baby. Les cried out, "God help me." He said, "All I remember about the next few seconds was I grabbed the little baby and automatically, carrying out the emergency procedures I'd been trained to perform." He said a button flew out from that little boy's throat onto the floor. Said the child screamed, turned red, began flinging his little fist, arms all around. He said that little baby, it was angry. but he was alive.
Amen.
Let's thought about it. Jobs, very thankless many times. And Les had been wondering if his job was worth it. If it was worth it at all. And he said, that moment, when I seen that little child was all right, I had made it in time. He said, my job is worth it. It's worth it all. Remember that. In the book of Numbers, chapter 32, we're going to see some things. But I want you to remember this one thing. Every time we fail to do the right thing, it has an impact. Every time we fail to do the right thing, it has an impact. Here in Numbers 32, the story, the context of it, we find the children of Israel. They have wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and which was really only about an 8 days journey if they went God's way, if they would obey what the Lord wanted them to do. But now it's some 40 years later. It was now time to enter into the land of Canaan. They're making the preparations to cross the Jordan River. We find at this time Reuben and Gad, they came to speak with Moses. And Reuben and Gad, they're not willing, they're not wanting to go into the promised land. Why? Wrong thinking. Wrong thinking. Remember, every time you fail to do the right thing, it has an impact. Even right thinking. Even right thinking. I want you to see just a few things here. The choice. The choice. We find that these made a poor choice, if you will. Look down to verse number 5. Wherefore, said they, if we have found grace in thy sight, let this land be given unto thy servants for a possession, and bring us not over Jordan. We find here the Israelites were ready to go over each of the tribes. But here are two tribes that are trying to be excused from going over. Now, the thing is, they didn't want to go over Jordan. Now, why didn't they want to go? We'll see that in a minute. But was it God's will for them to go over Jordan? I'll go way back, and you find it was. For time's sake, I won't go there. But was it best for them to go over Jordan? We find the answer there is yes. And why did they choose not to go over Jordan, where the Lord was leading that people, but they did not want to go? We find some of the reasons of their choice. if you will, look in verse number 4. I believe it is. Even the country which the Lord smote before the congregation of Israel is a land for cattle, and thy servants have cattle. We find here first the reason they did not want to cross the Jordan, where the Lord wanted them, was because of their fortune, because of what they had. They had gathered much, and their greed influenced their decision. They had much. It was good land for the animals. It was a good land. And they didn't want to cross. They had it great there. We find their fear. Look down in about verse 16. They came near to him and said, we will build sheepfolds here for our cattle and cities for our little ones. But we ourselves will not go ready armed before the children of Israel until we have brought them unto their place, and our little ones shall dwell in the fenced cities because of the inhabitants of the land. Their fortune kept them from going. Their fear. You see, they wanted to keep their family safe, and you can't blame them for that. They wanted their families safe. They had, well, they wanted to keep their families safe. And they were to go to the other side. There wasn't sureties of what they would have. And so here are these people. Faith to believe what God said, or to do what they knew they had. There's a fine line, friends, between faith and foolishness. A fine line between trusting, believing, and foolishness. And I think each one of us is probably still in that line and wondering. I know personally I have. I know I have in the past. And I know in these days I wonder which way to go on the line. But it's never wise to ignore what God has said. Ignore the will of God because of fear. So we find the effects of their choice. Moses makes some very serious but true accusations here about their commitment to the Lord and to his people. And our choices, remember, always have an effect on others. No matter what choice you make, it will affect others. The choices that I made many years ago when Glenn and I got married, it affected a lot of others. Got one picture in our house, and you see there's two of us. There was at one time. But you look at the picture on the other wall, what is it, 50, 49, or 50? 49 in that picture. So the choices affect someone else. Every choice we make affects someone else. We find don't only affect others, the situations, and it affects the ones who makes those choices. We find the impact of a choice. We find there in verse number 6, and Moses said unto the children of Gad and to the children of Reuben, shall your brethren go to war? Shall ye sit here? Their responsibility, if they did not go, their responsibility would be unfulfilled. And someone else would have to carry the entire load. If they don't go, it affects others, but what they must do. We find the influence of their choices. We find that their influence would not be a good thing, because many would be influenced by their choice. The other tribes would all be influenced. The people, their friends, their families. And so isn't that true today? The choices that we make influence our families, our friends, our brothers and our sisters, the ones we work with. You see, what kind of example did these and us, what kind of example did they set for their children? Folks, I wish we could understand that. I wish I could get across to people the influence that we have on people. What our influence does to others. We find they're compromised. This really, verses 16 to 33. But we find the compromise when dealing with spiritual things, commitment and in thought is never a good thing. If y'all will pray for me. I hate not be able to read, but I can't read very good. Someone's asked me about my eyes, and Lord willing, I will be having surgery on them, but can't get it done for up until I think it's April scheduled for. But I do have a hard time seeing. So if I'm not reading right or looking right, I look at you and think you're someone else, that might be the reason for it. Right? But we find their compromise consisted of two things. They came, verse 16, they came near unto him and said, we will build sheepfolds here for our cattle and cities for our little ones. Verse 17, but we ourselves will go ready, armed before the children of Israel, until we have brought them unto their place. And our little ones shall dwell in the fenced cities because of the inhabitants of the land. We find they wanted to settle on the east side of the Jordan River. But they would go over and fight with their brethren. Remember, they're on their way to the promised land. Once they crossed over, the battles would be there. They would go over. They said, we want this land. We want to stay here. This is where our home. This is where we want to be. But we will go over and fight with our brothers. We will go with them until they win the victories. But we want to come back and stay on this side. Now remember, there was the fortune. There was much they had. There was wealth. And they did not want to give that up. We find the consequence, if you will. We find the failure to do the will of God leads to many unpleasant consequences. When we fail to do as the Lord says, we find that they missed God's best for their lives. We find that their families grew up on the wrong side of the back on the other side. And then consequences. They don't always come soon. Sometimes they come later. Some 152 years later, we find that their position was made them more vulnerable to the attack, and they were the first to be captured in the book of 1 Chronicles chapter 5. We find the scriptures filled many places with those who neglected their commitment and paid a terrible price. I see a man, an older man. I see him sitting with his face buried in his hands. His name is Lot. Y'all remember Lot. I see him playing there beside of Lot. I see a cave behind him. There I see two young girls. He raises up. He looks out across the plains. Lot looks across the rubble. Looks across the city that's been destroyed of people. There he looks and his hands buried, face buried in his hands, and he weeps and he wails. You see, these little children are not his grandchildren. They are his children by his own two daughters. Why? He failed to do the right thing. He failed to do the right thing. I look another direction. At the Philistine meal, if you will. His name is Samson. A man that's grinding there, physically strongest man who ever lived. But now he's blind. Has no future. Why? He failed to do the right thing. I see a man standing head and shoulders above every other man. His name is Saul. Saul is the most handsome man in the whole kingdom. But now we see, as he's propped up between heaven and earth on his own sword, with the blade sticking through. He tried to take his own life. Why? Why was he cursed of God? Simply because he tried to change the way that God said he was to do things. He tried to do things his own way. His own way. You see, he tried to sacrifice to God instead of obeying God. God don't want what we have. The truth is, he has it already.
That's right.
He wants us to obey him. But we find that here he failed to do the right thing. Remember, not obeying is sin. Not doing right is sin. Not obeying. And every time you fail to do the right thing, it has an impact. Lot failed to do right. And there he's the father of those two little children by his own wrong. See the effect that it had on others. Samson, same thing. Why? He failed to do the right thing. Remember the story I started? Paul Harvey was known for saying, now the rest of the story. Les Brown, the deputy, said the next day he was coming by and approached the place where he had stood in desperation 24 hours before. And when he said, God help, he saw that big earth move. Les said, I wanted to thank that driver. So he pulled over and stopped. He said, the driver ran over to me and said, the baby. He said that driver couldn't. Very surprised at the emotion of this man. He said, sir, the baby's all right. He said, thanks to you and the help you gave. You saved his life. Weeping, that driver said, I know. But what I didn't know then was, unless he bit his lip, he could hardly speak. And with a whisper, that driver of that big earth mover said, that was my son. That was my son. Affected others. His home, a little bit. Therefore, to him that knoweth to do good, and doeth it not, to him it is sin. He made a road where there was no road. He made a way where there was like little baby. How come that night a little boy lived? I wonder when Les went home that evening, or excuse me, when that earth moved driver went home and found out that it was his own little boy. To him that knoweth to do good, and doeth it not, to him that is sin. Now, whether it would have been that driver's little boy or someone else's, it's always right to do right. As Bob Jones said, do right until the stars. And every time you fail to do the right thing, it has an impact. It had an impact as they was crossing the river. Christians, remember tonight what you and I do, what you and I say will have an impact. And when we don't do right, it's not murder, but it's sin. And you realize all sin has the same wages. It's bad. Do right under the stars. As we stand, I believe all of you, by your profession, for what you have said, you are saved. I wonder today, what about our actions? Have we done right because it's right? Remember, everything we do, it has, for every action, there is a reaction. As the pianist plays.